Good evening. I know what you're thinking. Jim, where's the music? I'll tell you where the music is. It was cut short by a power cut. We've just had a power cut here at GCSE HQ. And can you believe it? The lights have literally just gone back on and the internet's back on. Unfortunately, when I booted everything back up, Vicky and Sarah were there waiting for me for this session. So sorry about the music, Vicky, Sarah. I know you don't like to have a bit of a boogie to it, but...
It's in my head anyway all the time, Jim.
Okay, well, we'll get to the end of the session and then we'll ask you to sing your version of it as a player.
Okay.
So, apologies, folks. We didn't have our normal start to this session, but welcome. This is our ninth live GCSE Sociology revision stream. Today we're doing education and capitalism, and a variety of activities, including a couple of festive ones. So, if you're joining us live, have a go at the activities. Hundreds of students watched the replay last week, so hopefully you have a chance to give yourself a bit more time on this one. We won't waste any time because we've got some more live streams coming up at 6:30. So over to Vicky and Sarah for the session. Have fun.
So, thank you very much. So, like Jim said, we're looking at education and capitalism this week. So it builds on what we were talking about last week with roles and function of education. We focused really heavily on the functionalist view and the feminist view last week. So this week we are moving on to Marxism. I'm looking at that link between education and capitalism. So we're going to start off with some altered vowels, which is what we quite often do. So as usual, the vowels in the words have been changed, and you have a vowel that now makes a word not make sense. If you can work out what these words are and pop them into the chat window really quickly, they are all to do with education and capitalism. And that's what we know, the idea of education becoming a bit more like a business. So what do we think this first one might be? So I think this one is fairly easy. We're going to give you a couple of moments. If you are watching on replay, obviously you can pause yourself. Excellent, well done, Cara. It is competition. Excellent. We're going to talk to you about these in much more detail a bit later in the session. Okay, our next one. Okay, so the first word I think might be a little bit more easy. So the idea of sort of thinking about sort of applying for schools here. What might this one be? So again, if you can pop your answer into the chat window, pause if you need to give yourself a little bit more time if you're watching on replay. What do we think this one might be? Let's give you a moment to get this one down. Excellent. Jim, can we have the correct answer on the screen? It is parental choice, that idea that parents are customers now and they go shopping around looking for the best possible schools. And as a result, schools are obviously in competition. Okay, this one here used to be much more of an important factor when choosing schools than it is these days. And it is linked to parental choice. So what do we think this one might be? Okay, just give you a couple of moments to get your answer into the chat window. Okay, what do we think? Okay, Jim, can we have the answer on the screen? Well done, guys, for guessing this one. It is catchment area. So previously, you would have gone to the school that was your nearest one, and that doesn't always happen these days. And sort of catchment areas are less important than they used to be. And they actually change boundaries all the time as well. Well done, Cara. It was correct. You were correct with catchment area. And our next one, I think this one looks really difficult. It looks like it's an Eastern European word on the screen at the moment. So it is, again, to do with that idea of competition, parental choice, thinking about schools as a business. So what do we think this one might be? Well done, Cara. It is marketisation. Again, I'm going to talk to you about this a bit later in the session. So we have one last thing. Okay, these are really important for lots of parents when they're thinking about which schools that they want to send their children to. And also it's really, really important for those schools as well. I think this one might be. Okay. Excellent. Well done, Emma. Well done, Cara. It is league tables. Again, we'll talk to you about these in more detail in a few moments. I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk to us really briefly about what we're covering today.
Thanks, Vicky. That was a lovely warm-up. So we have a capitalism-packed session today. We've got some lovely festive gamified retrieval activities, and we are going to be looking at the following. So we are going to look at Bowe and Gintis, our Marxist theorists who give us some really lovely theory and concepts on the way that education prepares students for the world of work. We will then look at BB&G, Bowe and Gerwirtz, who look at market forces and parental choice and the marketisation of education in relation to competition. And then our favourite French person, Pierre Bourdieu, talking about kind of cultural capital and how schools reproduce this class system to keep capitalism going. So Vicky is going to kick us off with a festive big reveal.
Excellent. So like Jim said at the beginning, we have got lots of festive treats lined up for this session. So can you work out what's in the big reveal envelope using the clues on the Christmas cards? Can we have the first Christmas card up, please, Jim? So clue number 1 is... this pair conducted their research in 1976. So not the easiest, not the most obvious clue. Quite often your sociological studies were sort of conducted in the 1970s. So have we got an idea of who this pair may be? I think it's probably quite tricky with just the first clue. So Jim, can we have the second clue up, please? So they said that schools prevent rebellion or revolution. I know sometimes at period 5 on a Friday afternoon, it doesn't always feel like that, but they said that schools prevent rebellion or revolution. We've got some ideas coming up in the chat window, a couple of guesses already. Okay, number 3, schools use sanctions and rewards to reinforce compliance. So who might that be, and what is the theory that these guys came up with? So we're looking for a pair, and we're also looking for their theory. Okay, so in the chat window, we've got the pair of sociologists correct so far. So clue number 4. Schools produce passive and docile workers. So again, what could this theory be linked to? Okay, Jim, can we have our last clue up, please? So schools are organised to achieve exactly what the upper classes want. So at the moment, we have got Bowe and Gintis up in the chat window. Quite a few people have got that, so well done. Can we think what the theory is called, though? Okay, let's have a think. Just give you a moment. What was the theory that they actually came up with that talked about how schools prepare, they organise everything for the upper classes? Okay, Jim, can we have the correct answer? Our big reveal. It is the correspondence theory. So I'm going to talk you through that theory at the moment. So they are a pair of Marxist sociologists. So they have all sorts of ideas about schools. So they talk about school being really similar to work. So the main purpose of education is to serve and maintain capitalism. And there are 2 basic social classes: a small, wealthy and powerful class of owners of the means of production, the bourgeoisie, or the ruling classes, and a much larger but poorer class of workers. So we know these as a proletariat. And they claim that education reinforces these inequalities, and the education system is socialising children into their class positions, and it is not meritocratic. And we talked about the idea of meritocracy in education last week when we were looking at Parsons' work. So they came up with the correspondence theory, arguing that school is deliberately made similar to work with the aim of creating these obedient, docile workers who will not question how things are arranged and will not challenge things. Separately, the children of the ruling classes, though, are actually taught in private schools or similar. So they are really confident and they expect to run things and they expect to be in charge. And schools keep those children of working class parents working class, and it ensures the children of bourgeoisie parents remain bourgeoisie. That was an argument that Bowe and Gintis came up with. Those working class children will continue to work hard and put up with that low pay and poor conditions. The idea, they call it a myth of meritocracy. They talk about the schools working directly in interests of capitalism, and they have this quote here that work casts a long shadow over school. So let's have a look at how they do this. So there's a number of ways they believe that schools make us, they prepare children for that life of being a docile, obedient worker. So firstly, they say that schools teach us about hierarchy. At school, there's a clear hierarchy. You've got the head teacher at the top, a hierarchy of staff and pupils at the bottom. Often there might be an internal hierarchy, so you might have prefects, for example. In terms of the workplace, you also see this hierarchy. So you have a boss or a CEO right at the top of the company, different levels of management beneath that, and then right at the bottom you've got your workers. You might have some workers with the supervising roles, a bit like prefects, for example, within school. Okay, come with the next group. So they also reinforce this through the idea of rewards and sanctions. So school pupils are rewarded with good marks or with credits, house points, certificates, all those sorts of things. Not always because of academically best work or even the most effort, but what tends to be rewarded mostly is that idea of compliance, punctuality, perseverance, etc. And pupils will also receive sanctions of various kinds for disruptive or poor behaviour, maybe punctuality issues as well. If we then link that to work, the rewards for work are pay and perhaps sometimes bonuses, certainly not if you're a teacher, but they are in the private sector. And that reward is not necessarily for doing brilliant work. It's often for just doing as instructed and working without complaint, or for attending on time, not leaving early, that sort of thing. And workers can often find themselves going through disciplinary procedures or even losing their job when they step out of line. And again, this is obviously is linked back to school. Okay, can we have the next one? So we've got the idea of passive and docile workers being produced. So schools essentially train people to be passive, docile and uncomplaining according to Bowe and Gintis. So they get on without questioning work, even if it's really dull and boring. And in terms of how it relates to work, we talk about the capitalist system seeking a passive, docile, unimaginative and uncomplaining workforce. The bosses have the ideas and they expect the workers to get on with that work without complaint, even if that job is really tedious and unfulfilling. Okay, next one, please. So we have motivation here. So students are motivated due to that idea of an intrinsic reward, so sort of getting their GCSE results. There's not particularly any encouragement of the idea that you might actually just like, that love of learning, okay, rather than a job well done kind of thing. Whereas again, linking that back to work, workers are motivated by the pay rather than the work itself. People are trained not to seek fulfillment. So again, that idea of even if you're doing something quite boring, you're going to get paid at the end of the day. So that's your motivation. And finally, with this theory, they talk about the idea of fragmentation. So another important feature of school life is the way that knowledge is compartmentalised, it's fragmented, it's presented to you in clear and separate blocks. So you learn those different subjects. There's not a huge amount of linkage between them. And they argue that this kind of links to the workplace, because the workplace is quite fragmented. People will do their tasks with little knowledge of what else is happening in that sort of process. And the idea here is to alienate workers, and it helps the boss control the situation because those workers are not working together, they're working separately. So they create the products. No worker has the overview of the whole process, so they are easier to control. Right, Jim, I think we've got time for an activity here. So we have our melted snowman 20-second challenge. So I'm going to show you a question. You've got 20 seconds, and that in that time, we're kind of looking for an answer, try and stop that snowman from meeting a really sad, puddly end. So, Jim, can we have the next slide up, please? So 20 seconds. List as many ways as you can in which schools are organised to achieve exactly what the upper classes want. Excellent. Do you think we can have another 20 seconds, Jim? Excellent. Okay, so some ideas coming through there. So let's have a look at what you could have said. Okay, so we've talked about that acceptance of hierarchy, compliance through rewards and sanctions, the production of passive and docile workers, being motivated through external rewards, and that fragmentation of knowledge and subjects. Now, 20 seconds was not long enough for you to get all those down, but hopefully you got a couple of those down. Excellent, well done. There's some interesting other things coming in here, sort of talking about how this links to labelling theory and this self-fulfilling prophecy. Well done, some really good ideas there, Emma, excellent. And Kyra talking about those underachieving working class students. Interesting theories there. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who is going to talk to you about marketisation.
Sorry, Vicky. Sarah's just joining us. I think her internet disappeared. So we'll. Do you want to make a start? And then as soon as hang on, she's just arriving again.
Oh, perfect.
I think you're back with us, Sarah.
So sorry, I got unceremoniously booted out, but I managed to get back in time to be at the top of the league table. So we are having a look at Bowe and Gerwirtz. Am I just taking over from you, Vicky, here? I'm just...
I haven't started it, actually, so you can...
Oh, fantastic. Brilliant. So we are looking at a really important education policy, the 1988 Education Reform Act. And this was kind of the beginning of a really big push for marketisation. Sometimes you'll see this abbreviated as ERA. So if you see that in kind of handouts and textbooks, then you know it refers to the Education Reform Act. And what that planned to do was to create a market state in education. So basically to make the education sector act more like a business marketplace. And that gave parents more choice and control over their children's education, or that was the plan anyway. So this paper from Bowe and Gerwirtz, the Market Forces and Parental Choice in 1994 actually looked at and came in from quite a critical perspective, looking at the impact of some of these policies. So the key marketisation policies, one of the big changes was the introduction of league tables. It probably seems really alien to think that there was a time where there weren't league tables, because most of us have become so accustomed to them, and many of you have grown up with, not knowing anything else. But they didn't always exist. So the idea of putting schools into these lists where they're competing against each other to have these positions within the league tables, and then attracting parents in the way of, seeing parents as consumers or customers who they're having to attract to their business. Now, this does enable, the idea of it was to enable parents to really have more choice about the quality of school and where they wanted to send their child. So it gives them a really informed choice, because they can consult the league tables and they can look at, this Ofsted reports and things as well, all came in around this time. So parents have got this opportunity to use their parentocracy to work out which school is best for their child. And it meant that schools had to suddenly compete with each other rather than relying on getting the students, who were coming in from their local catchment area. They had to really compete and really consider this league table position. Next slide, please, Jim. And this put schools under pressure because it also introduced something called formula funding, which meant that schools would get the funding based on every bottom that they could get on a chair, so every student that they could bring into their school. And of course, the higher up you are in the league table, the easier it is to attract those students to your schools. So it put a real push on kind of schools having to market themselves. Some schools, as BB&G noticed in their study, some schools started to focus on attracting the high ability pupils and doing what they could to take those pupils, therefore to boost their results, therefore to get them into the higher positions in the league tables. And one of the ways that schools were able to create this real focus on high ability pupils was through having bands or setting and streaming. You'll see it referred to in the textbook quite often as setting and streaming. And what Bowe, particularly Stephen Bowe over the years, has done a lot of work on this, argued that streaming, so having students kind of in either a top stream or a grammar stream or these different streaming by ability, and Bowe also looked at setting, bottom set, top set, setting by ability. he noticed that there was this really negative effect on working class pupils. So we're starting to see here this Marxist perspective, because marketisation, making everything all, business-like, starts to have an effect on the working class students, so those who are already the most deprived in the education system. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we're thinking about marketisation in general, our key takeaways are it benefits middle class students more and it has a negative effect, so Bowe and Gerwirtz have found, on the working class students. Many schools wanted to become more middle class and attract those students. Am I still there? Sorry, that was
you're okay, Sarah. Yeah.
You can still hear me. That's brilliant. Sorry. So this idea of cream skimming, many schools wanted to attract the best students. They're looking to attract the middle class students. Cream skimming and silt shifting are these two concepts that are really useful to bring into your sociological vocabulary. And the idea that they started to try and cream the best students and, bring them into their school and then focus on them to get these higher grades, and passing a bit on low ability pupils. And what Stephen Ball found was that often the low ability pupils in the lower sets were left to their own devices and kind of given up on. And lots of other studies have found this as well. So working class students, this becomes a spiral. Working class students find themselves underperforming because they're ending up at the worst schools. Those schools are underfunded because they're not attracting those bums on seats, those number of students with the £5,000 attached to each of them. And those schools are then lower in the league table, so they find it harder to attract students to come to the schools. Bowe and Gerwirtz have also looked at the fact that middle class parents actually do take more of an interest. So they're very affected by league tables because it gives them this power, this kind of cultural capital they can use in order to navigate the system. And pupil premium was brought in, and this the purple bit on the screen here, you can see this is quite a nice evaluation, because pupil premium was brought in to help the students who really need this investment. So to bring in activities and to balance things out, maybe to allow these students to go on school trips that they might not otherwise afford, bringing in additional resources and support for them. So we do have some balance there, that around this time, not just marketisation and all of its effects, but pupil premium being brought in as well. So that creates a nice comparison in your paragraphs. And if we can have the next slide, please. We are going to have a go at an on balance. So this is a chance for you to use everything we've just talked about. So advantages of teaching in sets and streams. So we're talking about advantages of setting and streaming. So we're looking for a couple of advantages. So please drop some suggestions into the chat section and let us know what kind of advantages do you think there are of teaching students in terms of setting and streaming by ability. I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that. And we're seeing some answers coming through already. Fantastic. So there is this argument that students of different abilities can work to their full ability. Brilliant. Thank you, Kyra. That's a really good suggestion. So the idea that it does mean that people can students can have the right support for them, and they can be in a class that suits their ability. There's also the idea that brighter students, as you can see on the screen now, might lose interest if the lesson is kind of going at a slower pace to keep up with students who might need it at a slower pace. So this idea of differentiation being provided by setting and streaming is something that is arguably has advantages for the students in the education system. So we need to balance this out now with some disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of setting and streaming? And you might want to think back to what we said about Stephen Ball and some of his findings regarding setting and streaming. Well done. We've got some great answers coming through already. So it could result in those students being kind of given up on, left to their own devices, as Stephen Ball found in his Beachside Comprehensive Study. Lower self-esteem, because these students are kind of being labelled and they've been put into the bottom set. And actually, Stephen Ball found that it wasn't always on ability. Often it was simply on the way that students presented themselves. And therefore, there was a class discrimination in there. And you can see on the screen that we've got this kind of loss of these light bulb moments where students suddenly get it and have this great, this great building of their confidence, and also the labeling aspect. It can lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we see with things like foundation papers that there's a glass ceiling, and students are, once they're in the bottom set, they don't actually have access to the top grades. So there we go. We've got a nice, brilliant balance there of the benefits and the disadvantages of setting and streaming, which is a really important area to build into your revision. And I'm going to hand over to Vicky here to look at Pierre Bourdieu.
Excellent. That was a brilliant. I really love those on-balance activities. I think they're really interesting. So we're going to quickly remind ourselves of Pierre Bourdieu and his argument that schools reproduce the class system. So, this is something that Bowe and Gintis have already said as well. So we know that Marxists generally believe that schools are set up to benefit those ruling classes and that working class students generally miss out. So he talks about the belief that the whole education system is rigged, so those upper middle classes stay at the top of the capitalist system, and they will then go on to own the means of production. And he talks about the idea that the upper classes are the people that control the education system. And obviously this is becoming more and more apparent as we move towards these academies that are almost run like big businesses rather than local authority schools. You can definitely argue that the upper classes are having more and more control over that education system. And there have been cases over the last few years where people have almost been sort of accused of buying their way into sort of these big CEO positions in school, or certainly being on a sort of a board of trustees and all sorts of things there. So he talks about how upper and middle class students have the same cultural capital as schools. So children from those classes will succeed and working class students will fail. They'll feel less comfortable at school. Their self-esteem will decrease, and therefore they will find it more difficult to actually succeed. And that will then mean that those upper class and middle class students go on to get the best jobs in society. And he will argue that the private school system really accentuates that divide. So in private schools, students get lots of different opportunities. There's much more funding. There's more opportunities for extracurricular clubs and things. There's things like debating societies, all sorts of things that will produce, help you with really important life skills that some state schools don't have time or money to invest in. And he talked about the idea of that capital, that cultural capital that's so important for students and how this affects attainment. So the idea here of economic and cultural factors such as language skills, interests, knowledge of the arts and literature, theatre, music, personal values, etc. And he talks about how middle class students and upper class students have the same sort of cultural capital as is found important in school. So your teachers generally will be pretty middle class because of the nature of the job. Therefore, they're going to have similar cultural capital here. And he argues that this is regarded as quite superior. It's the same as the culture of the school. And all of these factors, these cultural capital factors, are going to make students, they'll give them a bit of a head start in life. They'll make it much easier to go on and get those upper class or middle class positions later in life. So we're going to have a quick go at a festive connection wall. This looks at some of the ideas around cultural capital. It looks at material deprivation, all sorts of things here. So we have 16 words on the screen, or 16 phrases. They can be grouped into 4 groups of 4. I'm going to give you 30 seconds before I give you a clue. I want you to have a quick look at them all, and I want you to see whether you can spot any groups of 4 before I start giving you a clue. So let's have a look, see what we think. Is there anything that you recognise that we have already talked about? Okay, so I'm going to start off with giving you a clue this time to get you thinking, otherwise it's quite difficult. What we'd like you to do is to pop your answers into the chat window. If you notice that we have got letters and numbers down the side, so if you can just pop which ones you think are correct. So our first ones that I want you to have a look at are 4 cultural capital connections. So which things are to do with cultural capital that have an impact on schooling? What do we think? Some excellent answers coming through there, Kyra, for your links. If you keep those in your head for a couple of more minutes and we'll come down to that. So which ones are to do with cultural capital? Let's have a think. So if you are watching on catch up, give yourself a couple of minutes to pause, have a look through. Jim, can we have the cultural capital connections on the screen? So that idea of lower cultural capital, parental interest and encouragement, that's an interesting one. The idea that middle class parents are perhaps more engaged in education. It's a stereotype. It certainly isn't always the case at all. Parents' level of education, so middle class parents tend to have a high level of education, and then we have speech codes. So speech codes are quite important. They help you read those exam questions and kind of work out what those exam questions are asking you to do. Okay, our second group of connections. Which ones are connected to Bowe's and Gintis correspondence theory? So we've got 12 more on the screen. Which ones are to do with Bowe's and Gintis and their correspondence theory that we've talked through earlier? Okay, some good ideas coming through on this chat window. Jim, can we have these ones up, please? Okay, so that idea, that acceptance of hierarchy and authority, the subservient workforce, are motivated by external rewards, and schools being organised to benefit the upper classes. Okay, now, the next 4 I'd like you to look for are just general ideas about education from the Marxist perspective. So general ideas about education from the Marxist perspective. Okay, we've got some good answers coming through. So certainly schools are not meritocratic. There's a couple of answers coming through with that one. That's a really good answer. Okay, we've got the idea of class reproduction coming through. Well done. Can we see the next 2? Okay, so middle class cultures being seen as superior. Well done. That actually came through for the Bowe's and for the cultural capital idea as well, which obviously could fit into as well. Can we see the last one with that one then? Can we find the last one? Okay, Jim, can we have these ones up on the screen? Perfect. So our last one is the idea of schools killing creativity. There's an absolutely brilliant TED talk by a guy called Ken Robinson that talks about this in particular. So we have 4 left on the screen. What links these 4 things? They may have to do a part-time job, poorer diet, poor housing conditions, and that lack of ICT access, resources, etc. What links those 4 things? Give you a moment to come up with a link. Kyra, I think you had this one a minute ago. So we've talked about cultural factors, we've talked about general Marxist ideas about education, we've got correspondence theory in. So what's our last one? Excellent, well done, Kyra. These are material factors affecting attainment. Well done. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk you through some exam practice.
Thanks, Vicky. They were challenging some of those connections, weren't they? Good high-level thinking. So it is that time in the session where we have a look at some exam gold. So here is an exam practice question to have a look at. So you can see here the question is asking you to describe one impact of the marketisation of schools, including what you know of BB&G's perspective on education. And you can see there is an extract here that's provided with the question, which tells us about Bowe and Gerwirtz and the fact they studied 15 schools, they visited the schools, the study examined how the competition between the schools influenced the performance of the schools, and they found that the publication of the league tables led schools to really focus on bringing in different measures to improve their ranking of these tables. So let's have a further look at the kind of answers you'd be expected to use in this question. So if we can have the next slide, please. Thanks, Jim. What you want to think about here when you're describing one impact of the marketisation of schools for this 4-mark question is you might think about schools wanting to recruit more able students in order to boost their results and their position in the league tables. Or you might focus on this idea that there was a reintroduction of setting and streaming, and that this really created an advantage of more able students and neglected the less able and those with special educational needs. Or you may focus on the idea of schools competing for customers and therefore focusing a lot of their funding on big open days, evening events, and really attracting, working on that producer-consumer relationship with parents and competing to get those bums on seats. And we are ready for the next slide, please, which is our exam gold. So the examiner, as we always say with these 4 markers, when it says explain one impact, that's all you need to do is focus on one and develop it to the scope of the 4-mark question. If you list impacts, you will not be credited for any of them except the first one that you give. So you won't be credited for additional reasons. The examiner wants to see that you understand this move of schools operating more like businesses rather than just like schools have in the past. And they want you to show an understanding that there is an increase in parental choice. So when you think about what is marketisation, parental choice and competition really have to be your key words here. And the idea that schools have to work hard to appeal to parents as their consumers. And you choose that one impact. So you may choose the quest to drive up results. You may choose this focus on league tables. You may choose the setting and streaming and how that really focuses on high ability students. So you want to choose it, develop it, and then give some examples of how this really works and kind of what it leads to so that you're developing it fully to the scope of the 4 marks that are available. Okay, so that's our exam gold for this week. We are going to have a festive game of Rudolph's Odd One Out to test some of your knowledge from the aspects that we've looked at today. So all you have to do is look at the 4 items and see which one is the odd one out. So if we can have the first one, please, Jim. Here we go. We've got 4 aspects here. Which do you think is the odd one out? We've got schools kill creativity, schools produce passive and docile workers, schools reinforce the acceptance of hierarchy, and schools prevent rebellion and revolution. If I gave you a hint and said 3 of those are from a particular theory that we've looked at today, and one of them is not, have a think of the theories we looked at, and do any of those aspects jog your memory? I've had a couple of responses coming through so far. Seeing a mixed bag at the moment. Shall we have a look at the correct answer? It is that schools kill creativity. The other 3 answers were related to Bowe and Gintis correspondence theory, but the idea that schools kill creativity is more of a postmodernist outlook. So well done for those of you that got that right. Let's have a look at the next one. For the next one, we've got schools kill creativity, schools promote social cohesion, schools are not meritocratic, and middle-class culture is seen as superior. So this, I'll give you a hint here, this might be a particular perspective of education that we're looking for. Whose view of education might bring together 3 aspects here and leave one as the odd one out? This is a critical view. We've got some suggestions coming in. Fantastic. Let's have a look at the answer there, please. And it is schools promote social cohesion. The others are Marxist ideas and they are far more critical. Schools are not meritocratic. Middle class culture is superior. Schools kill creativity. These are all really critical view of education. But schools promote social cohesion isn't a Marxist idea because it is far more a functionalist idea. Let's have a look at the next one, please. And this is our third and final odd one out today. So let's have a look at the 4 aspects there. See if you can pop in the chat which you think is the odd one out. We've got schools competing for pupils, schools focusing their attention on more able pupils, schools choosing to become increasingly middle class, and parents sending their children to the nearest school. Which one of those sounds to you like the odd one out? And we're thinking of an approach here, really. Brilliant. We've got lots of suggestions coming through. And actually, everyone so far that has suggested has got the correct answer. Brilliant. So let's see what the correct answer is. So it is D, parents sending their children to the nearest school. The other 3 there are all aspects of competition and marketisation. All of these things we've looked at today as these effects of marketisation, but parents sending their children to the nearest school is something that we are seeing far less of due to that kind of informed parent who navigates the school system and looks at the league tables. Okay, well done there to everyone who took part. I'm going to hand back to Vicky to talk about our additional support.
Well done. Sorry, just coughing there. Some brilliant answers through there. Well done, and some really, really good contributions all the way through the session. If you need any more help with our work on education, then if you go to the Tutor2U website, you will find some really good resources. There's an excellent student education workbook, and there's some really, really, really good revision question cards as well. They're worth checking out. And obviously, you can catch up with our previous live streams on the Tutor2U on-demand page as well. Excellent.
Certainly can. Fantastic. I mean, isn't it great to see Bowles and Gintis and Bourdieu arriving again?
Yeah.
We've covered those a couple of times now on our live revision sessions for GCSE Sociology and of course A-level Sociology. So it's good to see them returning. It's quite a controversial area as well, isn't it? So really, really useful session.
Definitely.
Did I tell you I just got an advent calendar, a public school advent calendar? I don't know whether I've mentioned that before.
No, go on.
Well, yeah, it's an advent calendar, but all the windows are opened by contacts of my parents. So there we go. On that controversial note, a huge thanks to Vicky and Sarah for persevering despite the power cut here at TTD HQ and for being ready to deliver that fantastic session. Loads packed in. Now we're moving away from education next week, Vicky, aren't we? I think we've got 2 weeks left before our festive special.
I think we've only got 1 week left.
1 week, and then the festive special.
Research methods next week, and then
You're right.
And then we've got a break for a few weeks for Christmas. And
we are, but I'm sure we're going to squeeze a festive quiz in, aren't we? In that week, if we're the only people left, we'll do it.
There'll be festive quizzes aplenty.
Fantastic. So it's a research methods recap next week.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Look forward to that. Well done for everyone who's joined us live. As always, huge thanks to Sarah and Vicky. Fantastic session. Go to tutor2u.net/live to download all the slides. And also, if you've got some mocks coming up, and it's about 20 other sessions we've done so far this year for GCSE SOC. So lots of great stuff on there. You can catch Sarah and Vicky and Duncan and the team producing those sessions. So give those a try. But for now, until next week, see you later.
Okay.
Well done, everyone.
Bye. Yeah, well done. Bye.
Bye.